Today we are taking a trip down the meta comp in Mythic Plus for Season 3. We have looked at the most run Mythic Plus keys in the PTR, starting from plus 20-ish, which was the highest level run, down to 19, 18, 17, 16, to see basically the composition of which comps were being played, which specs were being played overall in all of these keys, as well as trying to take a combined global total basically since the beginning of the PTR in these keys, to see essentially which trend players are going for. Which is, sure, fine, it's the PTR, players are testing things can change. However, if you go like 3 days away from the beginning of the patch and 10 days away from the beginning of the season, and you see that there are 250 Frost DKs and 26 Windwalker Monks, 132 Marksmanship Hunters, and 39 Affliction Warlocks or 19 Auto Rogues, maybe that's an indication, perhaps, that this one is doing very well and these ones are doing not nearly as well, for example. So you do get some trend, some idea on how players are thinking about what to play for the next season. And this has shown us some pretty clear indication, especially when it comes to the DPS. Players seemed very clear, because since the very beginning of the PTR, you had Frost DK, Marksmanship Hunter, and Arcane Mage as the most played specs. Then we went through 7 different rounds of balance tuning, up until the one from a couple of days ago. So we have 1 week left, and the most played specs in the PTR in this last week: Frost DK, Marksmanship Hunter, Arcane Mage. It's been 5, almost 6 weeks of PTR. Nothing has changed in the most played specs. It's still those 3: Frost DK, Arcane, and Marksmanship. Now, to be fair, while for Frost DK they practically just exchanging their power level with Unholy of doing AoE damage, Arcane Mage is retaining their place of doing prio damage in AoE thanks to their Arcane Barrage doing more damage to their primary target. That's still the same niche. However, the one that is at more, let's just say, risk of being replaced is Marksmanship. There are quite a few players that do consider Marksmanship a fraud in the type of damage they are doing, because Marksmanship Hunter does have a very, we can say, front-loaded damage profile. What this means is they mow down low HP mobs before other specs even have time to get their AoE rolling. They really do a lot of damage early on. For example, if you look at this, default generic pool 1 of this plus 19, where Marksmanship is expectedly doing 30 million DPS in this pool. Actually, if you actually shrink it to when he's actually doing damage, the DPS is closer to 60 million damage. You can already see from the breakdown that the front loadedness is already visible, first of all, and the fact that they don't really have a lot of priority damage. They do have, now with the nerf especially of trick shots, as you can see, because trick shots only does a portion of the damage of aim shots to the other enemies, of course the primary target of your aim shot will take more damage, but that's about it. Everything else, explosive shot, multi-shot, sentinel, volley, it's all spread. It's all just spread AoE. So you don't really have a lot of prior damage. You do tons of front-loaded burst damage in AoE, which accomplishes killing the small HP mobs very quickly, which can often be also kind of bad because you are killing sources, for example, of funnel, sources of extra resources for other specs that were using those small guys to gain more energy, resource stacks or whatever, and you come in and you just kill them in 5 seconds and you ruin part of other specs' damage. That's what some players are complaining about when talking about Marksmanship Hunter. But still, just from numbers alone, they have been doing very well, as you can see from the damage done, first of all, and also they have been very popular. So we have still to consider them right now in pole position to be one of the 3 meta DPS specs for next season. Now, I don't want to trigger you excessively. Unfortunately, though, I still have to point out, I gave you a trigger warning, so mute the video, possibly even skip forward if you don't want to listen to this, but the 4th most popular spec past these 3, so after Frost DK, Marksmanship and Arcane Mage, I'm afraid to say it's Augmentation Evoker. there, I said it, I am just a messenger. It does seem like Og has been one of the more played specs outside of these three, possibly with the idea, for example, of just replacing Marksmanship overall. Definitely not Frost DK, and very likely still not Arcane Mage. So Marksmanship would be probably the victim of being replaced by Augmentation. Other targets possibly in line for replacing Marksmanship could be specs like Elemental Shaman, specs like Destruction Warlock, specs like Shadow Priest, based on a few other things that might be happening. But overall, just talking about DPS, the three ones in pole position are these three: Frost DK, Arcane Mage, and Marksmanship, with some more questions about Marksmanship, less so about their overall damage and more so about the type of damage they are doing, as well as possibly the utility they might be bringing to your group, which is very little. The extra damage or tankiness they might be bringing to the group, like raid buffs, for example, or defensives for the party, like AMZ or stuff like that. They don't really give you much of anything as a hunter, so you also have that kind of weakness as a hunter in Mythic Plus. So right now they are there, but they are the more at risk at, basically losing out overall by the release of this season. Where we have more surprises though isn't in the DPS, because we have seen these 3 DPS be present in the top at this point for basically 6 weeks of PTR. The bigger surprise is in the tank and healer positions, because we have Prot Paladin and Resto Druid. So from the beginning of the PTR, when players went in following what they knew basically from the Season 2. So Vengeance is the meta one, we play Vengeance. Disc is the meta one, we start playing Disc. You keep going throughout the PTR, up until the point where you're only 1 week away from the beginning of the, I guess 10 days away from the beginning of the season, and now Prot is 50% more played, almost 50%, 45% more played than Vengeance. And Resto Druid is like 70%, 75% more played than Discipline. It's gotten to the point that even Resto Shaman now is being played more than Discipline. Again, it was even visible by looking at just the higher key levels. There were still some Discipline Priests overall, but there were way more presence of Resto Druid in these higher level keys. So sometimes, whenever this happens, you might be wondering, okay, compared to what we have right now in live, is this because one of them has been buffed, like Resto Druid, or because Disc has been nerfed? Or is it because Vengeance has been nerfed and Prot Paladin has been buffed? Or maybe, the third option, is it because it's synergy? Maybe because Resto Druid and Prot Paladin go better together rather than Disc and Vengeance. In some cases, it might be we don't have Bloodlust, we might need a healer with Bloodlust, we don't have Combat Rest, we might need a tank or a healer with Combat Rest, etc, etc. So in the case of Resto Druid, the answer is both. They had their Wild Stalker hero talent significantly buffed. You have nerfed throughout the PTR because it was so powerful, but the default final version is that it has been buffed compared to live. Symbiotic Blooms and Bursting Growth, first of all, do 30% more healing, which you can already see the effectiveness when your run-of-the-mill guy can push out some 28% total healing with these two. These have been buffed with these results have been buffed by 30%. Thriving Growth base chance for Symbiotic Blooms to grow has been increased by 30%. So Thriving Growth, very simply, is this: your base chance to proc Symbiotic Blooms with Wild Growth, Regrow, and Efflorescence has been buffed by 30%. Twin Sprout also has an extra chance to generate Symbiotic Blooms from 20 to 30%. These are the more relevant ones because you don't really play with Implant. So first of all, your Wild Stalker tier set has been buffed by a lot. Then you have the second part, which is the negative for the other spec, the Contender, which is Discipline. Since Discipline also has been nerfed, you have gotten the preventive measures, giving you a 10% weaker power shield, and you've gotten Will and Woe, giving you a 2% per stack weaker power shield. So at max value, this is a 16% nerf, and this is a 10%, so 26% nerf to the power of your power shield. So these two combined have made Resto Druid grow significantly in power level. Now these two do an incredible amount of healing. You are also helped by other powerful things that can shore some of your weaknesses, like Absorb Shield, party-wide 6 million Absorb Shield for each player on a 90-second cooldown. Thanks to this trinket, it's very useful for a spec that doesn't really have healing prevention Absorb Shields like Rest of the Druid. No, your damage is not particularly good, even on good days when you can pull past 1 million DPS. It's still with a lot of effort, you know. You can look at this 30-minute key and it takes you 270 casts of Rake, 103 of Rip, 87 of Thrash, plus 66 of Shred, 65 of Swipe, as well as 25 casts of Ferocious Bite, so about 580 total casts in 30 minutes to be able to pull above 1 million DPS. And, you know, with the help of our calculator, if you have a 30-minute key, which should be about 1800 seconds, and you have to cast 580 buttons to do DPS, it's one button, one DPS button every 3 that you're clicking to be able to do this, like, measly 1.2 million DPS as a healer. So it's not that your damage is the shiny thing, the powerful thing for Rest of the Druid right now. In the PTR, you're not even changing that much when it comes to your talent setup. You have a few things like that you can float around, like move away from Trailing Vegetation to go back to Nurturing Dormancy, or get back your 20-second CDR when you use Trunk over going for Renewing Surge, but more or less everything else remains the same. However, we still have to mention the bug, because this has not been removed yet, and it is a significant power increase for your throughput, for your HPS, so we have to touch on this because it might have to be nerfed. Blizzard might go the opposite way like they have done before. They say, oh no, this was intended, it's a feature, and they will just patch this to be part of the feature of the talents. However, you have a bug right now as a druid, which has to do with a combination of your tier set, which says casting regrowth with clear casting causes symbiotic blooms to grow on up to 2 valid nearby allies. So clear casting is a 5% chance per tick of life bloom to gain clear casting, making your next regrowth cost no mana. Obviously, in Mythic Plus, you play with double life bloom. You play with your double stacks of clear casting total, plus more chances of getting clear casting. So the result is that if you put, you know, life bloom on yourself, you wait until you get your clear casting, you tag some players to be, I guess, in combat with you, so that then when I regrowth myself, they get tagged with my symbiotic blooms. Okay, that's the effect. You get clear casting, you use regrowth with clear casting, and you spread these symbiotic blooms to 2 other players. That's the default power of the tier. This power gets tripled because of this talent right here. Regrowths, healing over time, whatever. What matters is regrowths, healing over time is also applied to the target of your life bloom. So very simply, if I life bloom this DK, I life bloom, you know, these 2 players, I regrowth myself, and they both get the hot. He gets the hot, he gets the hot, right? That's the feature. This is whatever, you know, it's just decent to get yourself more mastery, more hots on other players. Where this becomes OP is that for some reason, your 2-piece considers the creation of the hot regrowth as a consumed regrowth with clear casting. So basically, when you generate a clear casting by putting my hots on them, right? If I consume this on myself, I will generate a hot on them, which will benefit from my 2-piece. So not only the regrowth of myself will spawn 2 symbiotic blooms, but also the hots generated on these 2 guys will also create symbiotic blooms. So if I consume them now, both of my charges of clear casting, I will get 3 stacks, he will get 2 stacks, and he will get 1 stack. Now this is not supposed to happen. What is supposed to happen is that only my regrowth on myself generates symbiotic bloom stacks, not the one on them, right? If I do it again, now I have 9 stacks, this guy has 2 stacks, this guy has 3 stacks. You know, this is not supposed to happen. This is tripling the value of your tier set. This has gone under the radar. It has gone unchecked. It's a good part, honestly, of the extra heal increase you are gaining thanks to this. After all, if we go and see the buff effects of this druid throughout this entire key, you know, with two life bloom on 2 players, with the extra increased chance of this proccing, you get a ton of these, you know, these clear casted procs to give you basically a regrowth with the cheese that generates 3 times the amount of symbiotic blooms from your tier set. So this has not been nerfed yet. So despite the mention of Resto Druid now being meta over Discipline Priest, you still have this fact that they might be fixed in this interaction at the moment. The other question mark about the interactions of specs is the age-old question of what is going to happen. It's cool to see these comps happening in the PTR, in these keys, but what happens once you start pushing in very high keys in live and players start again getting one-shot by mechanics? Right now there is an answer from getting one-shot by mechanics. It's called Discipline, right? You play Discipline, you play basically the shield version, you get yourself all the buffs that you can when it comes to Discipline. You play Oracle, which has its own built-in buffs to Arrow Shield, even though they're about to be nerfed. They're still the only way that can safely prevent you from dying, because even post-nerf, these are still some 7 to 8 million absorb shields, right? So the question is, sure, Resto Druid is powerful now, but when you go deeper in the season and keys start chunking players down to 20% HP from a single hit before a mega AoE comes, how do you save them without having the power of these absorb shields right now that you have as Oracle Discipline? And you know, this wasn't even that big of an issue in the PTR, of course, not even to Discipline, where even they throughout these testing weren't even playing as Oracle, right? Now the question is, of course, what happens once you go in the higher keys and you might start to need these big absorbs, and the extremely high throughput of a Resto Druid in keys with this build, with this symbiotic bloom and bursting growth value, doesn't really matter, because you need to stop someone from dying before the hit even comes. It doesn't matter if the player on him has Efflo hot, Life Bloom hot, double Reju hot, Regrowth hot, Symbiotic Bloom hot, and Bursting Growth. Doesn't matter if he dies in one hit, right? That's the only question when it comes to the value of Resto Druid right now. Otherwise, they are slated to be, for now, the meta pick as a healer in Mythic Plus. When it comes to tanks, you have the overtaking of Protection Paladin over Vengeance. Now, we are asking ourselves the same question: was it a nerf to Vengeance? Was it a buff to Prot? Was it both? Is it about the comp in Mythic Plus? So, Vengeance didn't really get nerfed. A 2% parry nerf doesn't put you out of the meta, and a 17% mastery nerf when you don't play mastery. Okay, here is the value for mastery for a Vengeance Demon Hunter. It's, you know, it's whatever. They don't really play with mastery anyway, so this is nothing. What gains much more value for them, what is much more hurtful, is that their tier set right now is quite good. The value in resetting the hunt, having a much higher usage of the hunt, is more powerful than what you will run here as Eldrazi Reaver in Season 3. This is not very good for tankiness. For defensiveness, for defensive power, this doesn't do nearly enough as what you did before. It doesn't really empower you by nearly as much. For Paladin, playing Lysmith, despite the multiple nerfs to Lysmith, especially in damage, Paladin is still playing Lysmith. This also doesn't do too much in terms of tankiness. It does give you 15% more healing in the 2-piece, and you get a free stack of Masterwork from Hammer and Anvil. They did get quite a significant nerf in terms of damage, because they were doing by far the most damage out of all tanks. Now they are doing much more normal damage if you look at the last week, basically, of the PTR. Right, this is even post-nerf, right? So it's fine damage anyways. The value was, as always, helpful patch notes. They don't really mention this. The value was in fixing, essentially, the damage you were doing by nerfing your lesser weapon damage, which was nerfed by 66%. Yes, this was nerfed by 2/3 and still does this damage. And the value of your Lesser Bulwark was doubled. Your Lesser Bulwark now practically heals twice as much as it was doing before. This has been quite a significant help to the consistent tankiness practically of Prot Paladin, which now is basically one of your bigger weaknesses. It now has been doubled in effectiveness. It's very good for smoothing your damage because it's a constant proc of 15% max HP absorb that happens plus the 2% ticking over 20 seconds, right? You already have tons of different options for your defensives, for your defensive cooldowns. You have utility, you have plenty of help for your group. The damage after the nerfs is still very high. What you were missing were more being able to smoothen out the damage more. You also have a very good combo with Arresto Druid, because of course one of the things Druid can do is smoothing out your damage, right? By putting, you can see the total healing done of the healer, it's about 27% all on the Prot Paladin. The barrage essentially of HOTS that you can put on the Prot Paladin is, tailor-made to give you consistent healing. Life Bloom, Efflorescence, one, more often than not double reju on the tank. These all help you keep you steady in terms of damage intake, whereas you yourself as a tank, as mentioned, already have the buffed Lesser Bulwark to give you more steady damage intake. This has all helped Prot Paladin quite a lot. Finally, you also have the helpful combo. The helpful combo that if you play both of these specs together, you have the 3% Devotion Aura damage reduction and the 1.5% Mark of the Wild damage reduction. So you get an extra 4.5% damage reduction from basically playing these two specs together, plus the 3% damage increase from playing a Mark of the Wild as well. It's still slightly better than the combo of Vengeance Discipline. Discipline was giving you 5% stamina, which is okay, plus the 2% damage reduction from Lenience, and then the 5% damage, magical damage increase by Vengeance, which obviously loses out a bit more when you're playing, for example, with a Marksmanship Hunter that doesn't really do too much magical damage, especially when you're playing with Sentinel rather than a Dark Ranger, as well as a decent chunk, not much, but a decent chunk of damage of Frost Decay not being fully magical. It's a bunch of it is physical damage anyways. So the value of the Vengeance debuff wasn't nearly as good in this comp. Now you get better damage reduction with Prot Paladin plus Resto Druid together. That seems to be the combined comp right now being played the most in keys. Of course, there is still plenty of time to see any changes around these specs, like for example the possible fix of the bug of Restoration Druid. But for now, when it comes to Mythic Plus, these have been the more played specs. There is still, of course, a chance for Discipline Priest to be played, as mentioned, especially if the keys go higher and you discover that you still need a Disc Priest to stay alive. The issue when playing Discipline is still their weakness in throughput. That's why many priests in the PTR try to go Void Weaver, because Oracle still has quite weak throughput, like consistent group-wide healing. They are much weaker right now than a Resto Druid, significantly weaker than a Resto Druid. They just have excellent ways to save that one player or those two players, particularly with their power shields. But when it comes to blanket AoE healing, Resto Druid is much better. So you will see how it will develop later in the season, which one of these two will prevail, more party-wide healing versus more saving individual players with absorbs. Right now, Druid seems to be doing better. Same goes for Prot Paladin and their buffs helping them, their smoothen damage, which also synergizes quite well with the smoothened out healing setup of Arresto Druid with their HOTS on the Prot Paladin. In terms of damage, as mentioned, most of this might have to do with balance tuning. For example, there is a very thin line between playing Arcane Mage and something else, possibly even Frost Mage right now. Although the prior damage of Arcane still has a lot of value. We mentioned when it comes to DPS, the one more at risk still remains overall Marksmanship Hunter. This is what, for now, we can say the expectation would be at the release of the season. Frost Decay, Arcane Mage, Marksmanship, Prot Paladin and Resto Druid. This seems to be the initial idea for the setup of Mythic Plus for next season. So, for today, on this Saturday, we have gone through the recap of what we think might be or should be or will be the meta comp in Mythic Plus. Now, given that Blizzard gave us 7 different rounds of balance tuning in the past month, things might still change, but for now this is the expectation given what we have seen from players, even from top Mythic Plus key pushers and their ideas of what they chose in PTR keys of Mythic Plus so far before the release of the season. So, for today, on this Saturday, it is now time to leave each other. We're starting as usual, the goodbyes, by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who has been supporting Competitive for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, yeah, we went for a switcheroo. Yesterday we had the video covered and bathed in light. Today we have a video in darkness. We like to play it fair.